Hello and welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are very, very well. I am excited for this episode today because I think it's going to help so many people. This is kind of a part two, but it is its episode on its own, right? When we're talking about revenue dips and making less money than you used to. And the previous episode was around what to do when you lose your revenue overnight. This episode today is about what to do when you're making less money than you used to and like how to navigate a revenue dip. And the reason we've split them into two is because actually I think they require really different perspectives. And often, sometimes we're choosing to take a revenue dip. Sometimes we're choosing to make less money, and it's not a kind of bad thing. So I wanted to create this episode today for those of you who chosen to take a revenue dip or you're experiencing a revenue dip and maybe you want to get out of it. Either way, this episode I think should be pretty helpful for you. So something I want to kick off the episode with is that if you're navigating a revenue dip, whether that's you've chosen to do it or you haven't, and often people are actually in the middle of that where they haven't chosen to do it, but then actually it happens. And sometimes it can be really beneficial for them. Sometimes it can be really beneficial for their life. It can really mean that they can do a lot more. And it kind of works on both ways. But your mindset perspective is really important in this situation. So if you're making less money than you used to, there's some really clear things we need to be certain on. So just because you're making less money doesn't make you less good at your job. Just because you make less money than you used to doesn't mean that you're any less qualified or that you should go after kind of any less of a client than you would have done previously. And the reason I share this is because this is stuff that I have seen come up with people, and it's a worry and it's almost like a shame. Like I think sometimes people think like, oh my goodness, I used to make this amount of money, and if you've halved that, maybe you've quartered it, maybe you're just like slashed it because you want to pursue something else, or you want a different work-life balance, or you want whatever the reason is. Like the reason is totally fine. You can have all the reasons you want. But then there's this kind of shame potentially comes up, or there's this like worry, or there's this like feeling like you're not enough, or you're not striving for enough. And all of those feelings are just so wrong. Like it's not fair. You don't have to feel any of them. And many of them are not true, right? If you take on less clients, that doesn't make you less good at your job. And in many, depending on how you would look at it, some people will argue it makes you more appealing, it makes you more exclusive, it makes you, more of a kind of joy to work with because you have that exclusivity. It's a luxury piece, some people will argue. But I really want you to shift the way you're looking at yourself in the sense of this isn't a bad thing. For many people, this can be a really amazing time. It's a real time for learning, it's a time for balance, and it's a time for change. So just get clear on what your mindset is around that. And then I want you to really own the season that you're in. Some of you will have to take a revenue dip because you have to. Something's happened in your life or something is going on where you're like, I can't keep going at this pace, so I need to take a little dip. Others of you, obviously, as we mentioned, might not be a choice and you might feel like this is just happening to you. Maybe the market has changed. Maybe you're feeling like, oh, I'm really feeling the kind of economic constraints of something right now. But either way, you need to own it. You don't need to be in denial and you don't need to be kind of wavering from it. You need to be like, okay, this is the situation. I'm going to own it. The next thing I want you to think about is the fact that it's okay for you to take a revenue dip and kind of giving yourself that permission of, it's okay. Like, it's totally fine. There's so much time in the world. Like, there will be a time and space for growth, but there's also a time and a space for looking after yourself or looking after other things in your life. Like, it's okay to make less money than you used to, and it's okay to take a revenue dip. Sometimes you're taking a revenue dip because you're in the middle of pivoting to something, or you're moving to something, or you're having to take that hit now in order to get to the next place you want to be. And that's a really tricky place for business owners to be. And I often get a lot of conversation around, I just don't know if I can do it, and I don't know if I want to do it. And I'm like, totally fine. Like, it's fair enough. But some of you will be sat in that because you're kind of working actively behind the scenes to build something, but it's not yet ready. But in order to make that happen, you've had to kind of shift ever so slightly to accommodate for that additional time. The other thing that's really important to think about here is, are you a seasonal business? Have you just experienced seasonal fluctuations which impact sales? And sometimes that is the case. If you are a Christmas-based business, in August, you likely are going to really struggle, or in June, you probably are going to be low, and you need to understand your business and understand kind of what is right and what is normal and what is something that you have control over and what you don't have control over. And I think sometimes people try and build businesses where they're pushing the boundaries and the constraints of consumer behavior to the point where it's not actually going to work. Like, it doesn't make sense. They don't need to push so much. They actually need to lean further into what do customers want, what do consumers want at what time, and blowing up their kind of amazing situation that they've got going on. But how can they amplify that even further so that they 10x their sales or 100x their sales? So really understand, like, why are you making less money? What is the reason for the income dip? I also think it's okay to acknowledge that maybe you're taking an income dip because you need to look after your mental health. And if that is your case, that's okay. That is so, so okay. You do not need to feel shame around that. You do not need to feel guilt around that. It is okay for you not to be able to manage it all. And maybe that's what you're feeling guilty about. Maybe you're like, I feel really guilty because everybody else can still run this profitable business and still do this thing and make all this money whilst dealing with a mental health crisis. But that's okay if you can't. Like, it doesn't make you any better of a person or worse of a person. You have to do what is right for you, and you've got to listen to yourself, and you've got to really think about what is best for you. The thing that I would tell you to look at, though, is if you are in an income dip and you're choosing to do that, or even if you're not, some practical areas that I would really suggest you look at is understanding your cash flow in your business, understanding the money in your business, and understanding how much money you need, because you're likely transitioning to a different phase. So figure out what is your new normal around money. What is the new amount you want to earn? What is the new minimum that you can earn? What is the amount that you want to take out of the business? And then also have a look at where is your energy best placed. So the energy that you are dedicating to the business, is that being used correctly? Could it be optimized? Could it be used in a better way? And often the answer is yes, because if you're sort of taking a revenue dip or you're making less money than you're used to, and that is because you want to work less or because there's less of something, you need to figure out where you can really make sure that your time and your resources optimized to ensure that that is going to work longer term. The other thing for you to look at is, where are the areas of opportunity? Often when you're downsizing your business or you're kind of experiencing a revenue dip, there's actually a lot of areas of opportunity that you can tap into that you potentially couldn't before. So really thinking about, what's a niche opportunity? Is there like untapped market? Is there an untapped place that your business hasn't explored before, but actually you now want to look at? Like, really think about, how do we do things in a way that's slightly different but works better for what we're trying to achieve? And often that means you're going to leverage what you've already got, and you're going to take the assets you've got and you're going to take the resources and you're going to use the strength of the business, but you can put it into a system and a format and a place and a newness that works better for yourself or the business as a whole. And that can be really beneficial for feeling like you're still moving forward and you're still a valid business and you're still kind of creating something, but in a space where it's still relevant to you, like that's still actually taking in kind of this idea of, I'm making less money and we're taking a dip in revenue. Going back to the money side of stuff, there's obviously an idea of, you need to make sure that you are cutting your costs, if relevant, for the to compensate for the fact you're making less money. So sometimes business owners will come to me, they're in a revenue dip, they've made less money, and they want to, they kind of haven't really done anything about the finances in their business. I appreciate that for some of you, if you're trying to move out of it, then cutting back, overheads or staff and stuff like that might not make sense. But for some of you, it will, and you just haven't yet done it. And so I want to just remind you that go through your expenses and figure out what needs to stay, what doesn't, what fits with this new bit of the business, and what really doesn't work and doesn't need to happen. And I know that that's a balancing act between short-term kind of impact and then this like longer-term sustainability of the business. But you have to think about what is going on right now in order for you to kind of make sure that you're navigating this in the most kind of significant way possible. If you are in a situation, which this sometimes happens, where people will say, I'm in some sort of contract with people, or I'm in some sort of thing, which means that I can't get out of it. And your business has changed and your business has moved and shifted to a point where you're now not going to utilize whatever it is that you have contractually been bought into. there's a few ways of looking at that. Yeah, there's a way of you've contractually signed something, therefore you're going to have to stick it out. And that's what most of the time is going to be the case. But there is a way and there is an option of you negotiating terms with suppliers or creditors or people that you have some kind of financial exchange with. And that's something for you to talk to and to see if there is any movement or to see if it makes sense to. Some of the things you're contractually obligated to, actually you can find ways to make it work. You can find ways for it to benefit the business. You can find ways to make sure that it does all figure itself out. But there may be room for you to look at how can you negotiate with someone, and whether that's the case of actually, I just need 2 months to get my head together. Can I still pay you the money, but can we move the hours to some other thing? Like, there's definitely things you can talk to people about, and some people will be open to that and others won't. Ultimately, I'm a huge believer of, if you signed a contract, you signed a contract, you've got to fulfill your obligation. But there may be ways for you to kind of be flexible. And that very much depends on what you've bought, I think. It's a tough one. I don't necessarily think it's like the best strategy ever, but I think it's something you could look at for certain situations. So let's just go back to our initial point of this episode. So when we're looking at what do you do when you're making less money than you used to and you're navigating a dip, if you are wanting to move out of the dip and you want to build up your revenue again, I really suggest that you get super clear on what are you selling, to who, and why. And I would suggest you sell like one thing to one person and you just go for it. And that is where you can sort of have a much stronger impact in all of the output that you're doing. Yes, you can have a couple of other offers. Yes, you can downsell people, but really have that core thing that you're like, this is what we're selling. This is what we're doing. Do you want to buy it? And creating marketing strategy around that, creating output around that, creating sales strategy around that. That is ultimately what you need to be doing. And really, really get clear on what are you trying to sell. Now, this can be amazing for the business because some people will come to me and say, this was the best thing that ever happened to the business because it helped us get really focused on what it is that we're trying to actually do. And I agree with them. I see a lot of people where that is true and it is the case, because once you start streamlining what you're doing, you really start to see, okay, this is where the true value of the business lies. And this is the stuff that we can do, but we don't need to do, and other people can actually do better than us. And that's a really core, amazing thing to get to, and a really beautiful thing for you to get to. If, however, you go through this process and you're realizing you're making less money than you used to, you're having a bit of a revenue dip, but it's kind of a pivot, it's time for a change, it's time for a shift, which is what we spoke about in the other episode, then there's a whole other piece of work you do around that. And what I would say to you is, if you're going to pivot, you need to make sure that you've got a kind of transitional period of time where you're continuing on generating money, or being able to complete all of the obligations that you have towards your business and finances and money, but then you can also step into a new season. This is a great time for you to download. There's a free resource available to you, which is a workbook that you can download. It's an edible PDF and you can type in your thoughts, and it's a sort of, I think it's a 16, 17 page PDF that you can access. You can print it off if you want and do it on paper, but that would be a great tool for you to use when you're in this position right now of figuring out what your next steps are and what the next version of the business looks like, or how the business is going to thrive during this revenue dip. Even if you're someone who you're convinced that the revenue dip is good and that's what you want and you're downsizing the business, I'd recommend you do the workbook, and it will help you to really consolidate what it is that you're trying to build and why. It's, as I mentioned, it's a free resource. You can go to www.mayjames.com/refresh workbook. We'll link it below. And in that, you can download it and, as I say, work your way through it and use every single question. There's a prompts and there's questions, and you can work your way through. It's kind of it's structured in a purposeful way for you to kind of move through your thoughts to get to an endpoint of figuring out, okay, this is what the next phase of my business is. This is what the next season looks like. And here's how I'm going to do it. And It's a really, really useful resource. It's a resource I use with my one-on-one clients. It's a resource I use with people no matter what size their business is. It is really helpful for gaining clarity and just getting a bit more clear in your head, especially if you're feeling kind of all over the place. A lot of people will feel very like 1 minute they're thinking this, the next minute they're thinking this, and it all feels very fluctuating, and that can be quite scary for people. So this resource can be really great at solidifying that and getting really solid on, okay, this is what I'm actually feeling. So that would be something that I suggest you take a look at and you get involved with. The other thing I wanted to say to you today is that if you are navigating a revenue dip, really figure out, how does this feel? Like, come back to yourself and be really present within yourself and think, how do I feel right now? Because many people, initially the thought is revenue dip, that's a bad thing. But then actually once they sit in it for a bit and they experience a bit, they realize it's great. They love it. Sometimes people are like, I love this. I want my business to be more like this. Maybe it's like you have more time, you have more thinking space, you have a freer schedule. Like, there is going to be benefits from making less money than you used to. And as I said, if you've intentionally done it, then hopefully there's tons of benefits. But even if you're in a situation that you didn't think you were going to be in, find the positives from it. Look at the real joy from it. Find the things where you're like, actually, I really like this. Even if I want to double the size of the business, I still want to hold on to this sort of thing. Because that's really key and will really help you to make sure that when you do grow the business, you're not just going to grow it for the sake of making more money. You're going to grow it for the sake of, oh, this actually works with what I want longer term. It's a great time for reflection, and it's a great time for you to just take stock of where you're at. I'm going to end this episode here. I feel like we don't need to go into further items. I think actually just really sitting in where you're at and going and downloading that workbook and working through it is probably going to be the best solution for you right now, especially if you're navigating this as we're listening. Please let me know how you get on. You can, send me a message. You can reply to the email that you get when you receive the download link. But I want to hear how the things are going. And I just hope that you know that you're not alone in this. I think it's a really normal thing to do. Taking a revenue dip makes tons of sense. I have done it numerous times. Many people I work with have done it numerous times. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's not a secret thing. You don't have to feel like you've got to not tell anybody. You don't have to feel like you've got to scurry away. Like, it's so normal, and it makes sense. Like, our lives fluctuate, business fluctuates, things change, our desires change, how much we want to work changes. Like, it is totally normal for this to happen. You really are not alone. Okay, I will leave you there. I will see you next week. You are welcome to go back at the back catalogue of all the different episodes and tune in to a different one if you want some company whilst you're filling in your workbook. But yeah, I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.